We have a cyber problem. Seemingly every single day, you check out the news, and there's a new iconic organization that's announcing that they've lost your data. At least you thought it was your data. Whether it's Target, Home Depot, Anthem, or our own government, every single day we find new reports. And it seems that these breaches know no bounds. They're not bound by industry. They're not bound by net worth. Every single organization seems to be vulnerable to breach. In fact, we have 2 reports out this year that suggest, both of which suggest, that over 70% of all organizations have experienced a data breach. Seemingly, breach is inevitable. But why? Why is it that a recent survey of CEOs in the financial services industry, 79% indicated cyber as a significant impediment to their future growth? Does it have to be this way? Why does breach seem utterly inevitable these days? Let's explore this a bit. One of the first reasons that I think that breach seems inevitable is that organizations grossly underestimate their own adversaries. Now, I'm not talking about the nation state, the military, or what in my industry we refer to as APT, the Advanced Persistent Threat. This is the boogeyman. I'm not even talking about those. Yes, those are real adversaries. Yes, we've seen evidence of their handiwork. Sony Pictures breach, the first and second Office of Personnel Management breach that leaked tremendous amounts of data from our government. But I'm not talking about those, because those aren't the adversaries that most of us have to deal with. Most of us have to deal with and grossly underestimate the financially motivated cyber criminals that are extremely competent and extremely profitable. This is big business. You might be shocked and a little frightened to learn that a recent report suggests that almost 1/3 of all targeted attacks were levied against organizations with fewer than 250 employees. 1/3. Not opportunistic, not whoops, I slipped and breached the organization. They're gunning for you. 1/3 of the time with less than 250 employees. That seems surprising. Another root cause. Organizations underestimate their own vulnerability. Some of this, I think, is due in part to the compliance-seeking behavior that seems to plague many organizations. Many organizations, their approach to security, the way that they're going to address this problem is through regulatory compliance. I don't mean to dismiss compliance or you trying to navigate successfully an audit. Those are worthwhile goals. But in my industry, we consider compliance to be merely the first step on the way to security, not the end goal. Let's break it down even more simply, though. Probably one of the clearest expressions of vulnerability comes with respect to patching. We all have to patch, right? If you don't, well, you're certainly already breached. That's just a given, right? But we all have to patch. Report out this year suggests that 99.9% of all vulnerabilities exploited that led to data breach, the fix for it had been available for over a year. Now, in my space, we have something special we call the O days or 0 days. This is the boogeyman we talked about before, the nation state, coming up with something that is so sophisticated, so clever, so new, you couldn't hope to defend yourself against it because the evil is released before the fix is. So you have exactly 0 days to defend yourself against this. Now, that's something that we worry about. That's something we hear about. And yes, I suppose there's reason to worry. But how about we first make sure that we take care of the 365-day vulnerabilities, and then we can start to worry about the 0 days. Perhaps the most insidious, though, is overestimating our own ability. I've been in this space for a little while now, and I'm excited to find that every organization seemingly spends more money on security, has more staff dedicated to security, and security has greatly increased visibility. Right? Senior management is now aware of us. We're not just the little people they keep in the corners in the basement with radon, No, we're visible. The board, the shareholders, the C-level folks are aware of security, whether they want to be or not. And yet, in spite of this increased staffing, increased money, increased visibility, breach still seems to be inevitable. The average amount of time that an organization is breached before they even realize it, 205 days. So more than 6 months, adversaries are dancing on your network and you're caught unawares. How do you find out 205 days later? Because someone else had to tell you. The overwhelming majority of the case, you are told about your own breach by a third party. And this has been a trend for years. So 205 days, adversaries are on our networks, and someone else has to actually tell us about this. That's pretty disconcerting. Does it have to be the case? I know some of you are a little worried now. You're thinking, oh my gosh, has he ever seen a TED Talk? Because you're not supposed to demoralize the entire audience, are you? No, it's supposed to be uplifting, worrisome. What can we do? How can we improve upon this? Is breach utterly inevitable? Is there anything that we can do? Doesn't seem like it, does it? But I think there's some significant changes that need to be made, and I would characterize it, honestly, as a paradigm shift for most organizations. For years and years, our overwhelming focus has been on preventing exploitation, preventing the initial compromise, trying to keep the bad guys on the outside. We put up a nice little wall, bad guys outside, good guys inside. That's the way we want it. Conceptually, I understand, that makes sense, but we'll just say it appears to be not working so well. So I would say fundamentally, we need to move from and reorient our organizations to emphasize not just prevention with products and services, but move to detection plus response. What does security that emphasizes detection plus response actually even look like? The first principle is design for fail. You don't want things to go sideways, but they're gonna. Absolutely, the adversaries are going to breach your network. They're going to breach the perimeter. And unfortunately, most organizations' security architecture looks suspiciously like a Tootsie Roll Pop. And once the adversary with their 3 licks breaks into your organization, you have just tragically no visibility at all. Once they're in, it's a free-for-all. Design for fail. Know that, without a doubt, you are going to be breached, and quite honestly, more likely, you already are breached. You just don't know it, because you're not looking. The major takeaway for design for fail, our goal, is to increase the visibility that we have after the initial compromise. Increase our visibility. Make sure that we can see the adversary's activity. With this heightened visibility, what do? Of course, we monitor everything. We look at everything. Conceptually, that's obvious, it's simple, and it's quite often wrong. Certainly, if you gather every grain of sand on the beach, you will find the grain of sand that you're looking for. But it's going to take a little while. one thing that we find is relatively commonplace nowadays. After a breach, it comes out that an organization had the data that showed evidence of the adversary. How else could we, come back in and say, hey, yeah, it was 205 days ago that you were compromised? An organization that was breached for 5 months without realizing it, it came out in the press that there were 60,000 unique alerts that pointed to the adversary. Bad guys here, 60,000. And the press took them to task and said, oh my gosh, what are you doing? There were 60,000 alerts here. How did you miss this? Their response was, I know 60,000 sounds like a lot, but do you realize what a fraction of a percentage point this is? It sounds like a lot, but if you only knew the other stuff that we were ignoring, oh my goodness. You're not making us feel any better by telling us that you're missing so much more than we can realize. What I find in many organizations, this is the way that they want to solve the problem, is we need more data, we need more visibility. Usually what I end up seeing is that by collecting all of this data, putting it in one gigantic bucket, what you end up with is becoming very, very efficient at ignoring vast quantities of data. At least it's in one place. It's easier for you to ignore. What we want to do is move towards impact. Consider impact-focused detection. Primarily what we want is we want to look for significant adversary activity. Of course, that kind of begs the question, what the heck is significant? What does this look like? It's easy to say, what does this actually look like? And that brings us to the third pillar. This is adversary-informed hunting. We have the concept of a hunt team. And this is probably a foreign concept to most folks here, I'd imagine. But this term and this idea, it comes from kinetic warfare, right? Military. Imagine yourself with a significant presence in a hostile area. So you got a military base in a hostile area. You've got a vast perimeter. You got a nice, beautiful fence. You accept as a given that the hostile actors beyond the fence are going to breach that perimeter. You can't possibly monitor everything. The idea of the hunt team was that they took as their starting point the inevitability of this breach. They went out, and their job was to find the adversaries that they knew had already breached their perimeter. Now we're taking this idea into the cyber realm. Expect and know that you're already compromised, and going and looking for your initially failed prevention and your initially failed detection. But again, what does that actually look like? I think a good way of illustrating what we want to look for, what we want our teams to hunt for, is to think backwards through an intrusion. You got a data breach. That involves data having been breached. I know. You weren't there yet. Data is stolen. Data is exfiltrated. That's the fancy word for it. Yeah. So data is stolen. Adversaries take data from your network, send it out to the world, send it out wherever. First, let's look at this backwards. So the data is stolen. We look for any of this data having left our organization. And in particular, we focus on the modes and methods of egress, right, outbound. How could someone get this data out in the first place? How could someone send data from your network outbound? And there's quite a few places, aren't there? For most of our security architectures, we allow a lot outbound. So this is actually pretty challenging to do, to focus just on the data leaving. But how did they get the data in the first place? Was the data on the system that they initially compromised? Usually no. Thankfully no. Right? Typical intrusion, we've got an individual client system that gets compromised. Somebody clicks that link, opens that attachment, hits that website, and then pop. Okay, that happens all the time. When the adversary is compromised at endpoint, do they have what they're looking for? No. It's a means to an end. It's not the end in and of itself. The adversary wants to breach your data. We've said that they're going to steal your data. How did they get that data in the first place, though? This implies lateral movement throughout your organization. And that's the second thing we're going to look for. So we're looking for modes and methods of exfiltration. We're looking for lateral movement. How is the adversary moving throughout your internal network, looking for that sensitive data? The third and fourth will kind of roll together. Third and fourth elements that we're going to have our hunt teams look for. While the initial compromise typically takes seconds to minutes, from the first stimulus that you can see, it generally takes minutes before the compromise occurs. I'm not going to outrun that. But generally, the breach of data takes them weeks or months, or in some cases years, to actually pull off. So after that initial compromise, we've got some time here. We've got some time to find them moving. But if the adversary is going to spend that much time, I know you might not be great at patching, but every now and again, you're going to patch your systems, right? And you got to reboot. How does the adversary persist? That's what this next one's about. The two final elements are command and control and endpoint persistence. So how does the adversary use that system that's compromised to have it pivot throughout your organization? They have to interact with it. And they have to be able to maintain that access over time. They have to keep that access over time. So that's where the endpoint persistence comes in. The average cost of a data breach is now estimated to be $3.8 million. Your organization is breached, that's the average cost. The estimated cost of security, $500 billion annually. That's not just breach, that's everything encompassed. 205 days, adversaries are on our networks without our knowledge. There is tremendous room and need and opportunity for improvement. My belief and my hope is that by moving from prevention to a detection and response, we at least might have a fighting chance in this increasingly hostile cyber world. Thank you.